You've been told that sitting still, visualizing a better future, and deeply feeling it can rewire your brain and transform your life. But what if that simply isn't your experience? I know because I've gone through that. I dove into neuroscience and, in particular, Joe Dispenza's work back in 2016. I read the books, I downloaded the meditation, and did the meditation diligently for an extended period of time without noticing any change whatsoever. I actually felt numb and disconnected. It felt like I was gaslighting myself into positivity. And as someone who struggled with people pleasing in the past, it really felt like it wasn't really healing. It was me self abandoning myself again. That is until last year I finally got into doing the meditations in a way that actually worked for me. And I did that for 300 days in a row. And in this video, I am sharing what has changed and all the processes that I went through that allowed me to stick with the meditations and feel and experience the transformations that I've heard from other people. So let's get into it. Hey, I am Hedi Shah. I'm a mindfulness teacher and a body worker, and I teach those who've tried everything to finally move beyond what keeps them stuck and in pain through movement and mindfulness. To understand my journey, we need to go back in time for a second, in particular back in 2019. That's when I was still struggling from all the symptoms post car accident, in particular, a lot of concussion symptoms. And I was literally unable to sit in meditation without having a panic attack. And this was for someone who had meditated for about 5 years before this incident. So out of desperation, I started neurorehabilitation and somatic work. And it was the first time in a year, because my accident happened in 2018, and throughout that process I was in the midst of figuring out what can actually help me. For the first time in 1 year, I felt like a switch was on. I was reconnecting to my body and feeling more grounded, and I could find my feet again, because before that I felt like I was floating through the space and I had no ground or no sense of present moment anymore. As you can imagine, this intrigued me, and I dove deep into somatic work, breath work, and later posture work, which completely transformed the way I work today and how I support individuals in that. And this powerful experience pulled me completely away from the mainstream neuroscience world. And because I was getting results, so I didn't really felt the need to go back into that field anymore. Last year, I suddenly felt this strong urge to revisit Joe Dispenza's work and experiment and meditate with his meditations and see whether or not my feeling is any different this time around. Would that land differently for me? And here's what happened. As I committed to Joe Dispenza's daily meditations, two main patterns emerged. First, the fog lifted. As someone who often struggle with having that sense of clarity and knowing what I actually want, this was a revelation. The meditation created a space where my desires and, most importantly, the feelings that I wanted to actually cultivate in my life finally crystallized. Every time I genuinely tapped into a deeper feeling of peace, joy, presence, it was like tripping a silent alarm. Shortly after, something would trigger me significantly, or an old wound would get flared up, and some inconveniences would send me into a spiral. Here's what I did differently this time around. This time around, I did not push through my triggers with more positive visualization. Instead, I paused, I took a step back, and actually sat with the trigger parts through internal family system and somatic work. This created a life-changing feedback loop that I will explain them in three very vivid phases. The phase one is a clear destination and a stronger sense of self that was actually created through Joe Dispenza's work. I truly believe that his work and his meditation has this brilliant ability to help you cultivate a stronger, more conscious sense of self, the capable captain of your inner ship. However, my ship was already occupied with protective parts that had been running this way of operating for years. In the second phase, that was when the trigger would reveal resistance, right? My trigger would show me the parts of me that were intimidated, frightened by this new destination that the self was creating and cultivating. And when that self with a capital S would tap into a deeper sense of calmness and ambition, these old guards would panic and worry. So the hypervigilant part of me that felt worry was necessary for our safety would rebel against it when we actually experience that deeper sense of peacefulness. The part that holds shame and this deep seated sense of unworthiness and inadequacy would sabotage when I was feeling this deep sense of self-worth. Here's what was actually happening in the brain. Your prefrontal cortex, aka the CEO, says, okay, let's imagine a future that we feel safe, we feel joyful, we feel successful. Your amygdala, aka your security alarm, would say, unknown state detected, unknown state detected. This feeling does not match our known safe or even unsafe database. So this might be a trick. Initiates panic protocol. That's literally what was happening in my brain. The somatic and IFS work soothed these triggered parts, these threatened parts, heard their concern, brought them on board. Somatic practices typically doesn't start with the CEO, doesn't start with that prefrontal cortex envisioning. It starts from amygdala, the survival brain. It calms down the survival brain. They work from the body to the brain, not the brain down to the body. And that's brain down to the body. That's what Joe Dispenza's work actually is. And that's why so many people struggle with it, because I think a lot of us are really stuck in that survival brain and we're really carrying a lot of stress and tension and anxiety in our body. So it's really hard to cultivate that coming up to that vision that we want and be able to move forward as a whole towards the vision that we actually want. Without this partnership of body to the brain, brain to the body, I would not have been able to continue with the Joe Dispenza's work. And I can realize that having access to somatic work and being able to process the parts that were against this new direction and this new way of being we were developing, I wouldn't have been successfully carrying this forward. Somatic work in my case went back to pour the foundation and allowing this new structure that we were building, the new way of being that we were building, to stand on. In a well-regulated nervous system, the CEO is in charge. It can send calm, clear messages like we're safe, down to the security alarm system, which then that gets to stand down. Visualizing a positive future from this state works beautifully because it allows and it directs the entire system. And the entire system is a lot more receptive to this new programming. If you want to explore somatic work and seeing what that brings up for you, try this video here for when you cannot shake that triggered feeling. So now that we got that out the way, I actually want to share 3 transformations that I experienced through Joe Dispenza's work after doing that for 300 days in a row. I still go back to Joe Dispenza's meditations. I don't necessarily do them daily because I also am interested in other modalities, and we only have limited time in a day to be able to do the things that we actually enjoy and support us. But for that 300 days, after that 300 days, which I can affirm that a lot of those changes still are present, they've been long lasting in my life. And to summarize, here are 3 of them. I began experiencing coherence between my mind and my body. Before this, I could really tap into my heart and my heart's feelings and my body's sensations. But my mind would get really cluttered or chaotic and be in all over the place, as if I couldn't really direct these two to be able to move into a specific direction. After doing Joe Dispenza's work, I truly felt this body brain or heart brain coherence, that I could actually move. If I had an intention mentally, my body would carry it forward. If I had something deeply landed in my heart, I would be able to really tap into my mind's ability to see the vision so we can move forward as a unit. This was certainly something that I struggled before significantly with, and I was really happy to see how I could really experience this sense of coherence and equilibrium in my system. The second one was breaking the glass ceiling. I often felt like there was this cap on my well-being, or how well I could be in my life and how good I could feel before life would throw at me something and I would lose my ground, or I would lose my sense of well-being. And I feel like after doing Joe Dispenza's meditation, especially the morning meditation, which I will link all of my favorite meditation practices on Spotify down below, especially with the morning meditation, which I think it comes from the book Break the Habit of Being Yourself, that you're imagining who do you want to be and who you don't want to be. And I think the contrast and the knowing who you don't want to be, and you can really review the patterns that you typically get stuck into, was extremely helpful for me to ride the waves of life challenges and really witnessing myself that, like, this is happening because I already played it in my mind. And then when that actually happened, I felt like I would go through it so gracefully, and life challenges wouldn't control my state of being as much as it did in the past. Not that I didn't have any emotions, I actually would feel the emotions. I would allow it to move through me and move on a lot quicker than before. Last one, which I call this the ultimate success. I often used to say this. I know the inner work works when I spend time with my family and I'm not losing myself in the process. Because you probably, like me, you already analyzed a lot of the stuff that happened in your childhood, in your relationship with your family, and you understand a lot of them intellectually. Even like somatically, I understood a lot of the stuff that I was navigating. But I would typically imagine going into those dynamics and behave a certain way. But as soon as I would enter that environment, like my inner child would hijack the scenario, and I felt like I wasn't in control of how I was behaving. But through this work, which I actually, when I went back to Iran, I spent 3 weeks in the same house with my parents. And I continued with this 300-day Joe Dispenza meditation. And I realized that I was actually seeing things very differently. I was seeing my parents as humans, and in a way that really like opened up my heart in the most beautiful, compassionate way. Not that I was forcing it in any sort of way. I was just able to see that they are doing the best that they truly can, not intellectually, like physically, and in my heart deeply feel that. And at the same time being able to honor and have reverence for myself and my needs, and being able to communicate them as calmly as possible. And this was the first time that I actually spent time with them, and I thoroughly enjoyed them, and I felt like judgy mind or the controlling mind wasn't as much in the front seat or on the driver's seat. And yeah, and I was like, wow, this thing has worked, and I really feel a lot more grounded. And yeah, I highly recommend getting into just Joe Dispenza's work. And like I said, I will put all the meditations that I love down below. But if you've tried it and you're curious about it, but every time you explored it and it hasn't worked out for you, so the missing piece is understanding the somatic expression and what's the body is going through, and being able to bring that element of from the body to the mind, rather than constantly trying to push through the mind into the body or brain into the body. Hope this video served you, and the resources, I also will share the somatic meditation down below, and you can also find my other meditations to support you somatically to explore life in a new way. Thank you so much for joining, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.